Have you ever noticed how some people around you seem to possess unshakable confidence, a strength that never wavers, a certainty that is never questioned? Perhaps you yourself have admired these people, wished you had that same apparent solidity, that capacity to face any storm without showing fragility. But what if I told you that much of this strength we see is merely a carefully rehearsed performance? What if the circumstances rapidly approaching were capable of revealing in a brutal and inevitable way who has always pretended to be strong and who possesses genuine resilience built through honest acceptance of their own vulnerabilities? We are about to witness one of the greatest revelations about human nature that our generation has ever seen, and this will happen much sooner than we imagine. History teaches us that moments of greatest pressure are those that separate real strength from performative strength. During the Great Depression, we saw apparently invincible magnates crumble before the first waves of economic instability, while simple people who never proclaimed their resistance demonstrated a surprising capacity for adaptation and survival. In World War II, leaders who built empires based on intimidation and projection of absolute power revealed themselves to be cowards when confronted with the reality of destruction, while ordinary individuals who always acknowledged their human fragility found reserves of courage they didn't know they possessed. The pattern repeats throughout human history. Crises do not create character, they reveal it. And we are rapidly approaching a crisis that will be different from all others humanity has ever faced. What makes the period we are entering so unique is the convergence of multiple disruptive forces that will simultaneously pressure all aspects of human experience. We are not talking merely about an economic recession, a pandemic, or an isolated war. We are entering an era where artificial intelligence is irreversibly redesigning the job market, where climate change is forcing massive migrations and transforming the planet's geography, where political polarization is threatening the very foundations of democracy, and where the digital revolution is fundamentally altering the nature of reality and truth. Each of these forces, by itself, would be sufficient to test the limits of human endurance. Together, they create a pressure environment that will expose every flaw in our emotional armor, every crack in our social masks, every contradiction between who we say we are and who we really are. Fake strength has always thrived in stable and predictable environments. It is easy to maintain a facade of invincibility when the rules of the game remain constant, when paths to success are clear, when social and economic structures provide a reliable stage for our performances of power. But we are entering a world where these structures are simultaneously crumbling. The executive who built his identity around his ability to dominate meetings and manipulate corporate hierarchies will discover that these skills have become irrelevant when artificial intelligence can execute his functions with greater efficiency. The influencer who based her authority on followers and engagement metrics will see her digital empire collapse when increasingly sophisticated algorithms expose the artificiality of her audience and the superficiality of her content. The politician who built his career on empty speeches and grandiose promises will be confronted with problems so complex and urgent that no rhetoric will be sufficient to mask his fundamental incompetence. At the same time, technology is creating a level of transparency and interconnection that makes it increasingly difficult to maintain false personas for long periods. We live in an era where every word can be recorded, every action can be documented, every inconsistency can be instantly exposed to millions of people. Social media, which initially seemed to offer new opportunities to build idealized identities, are revealing themselves to be traps for those who have grown accustomed to living double lives. The person who projects success while struggling with crushing debt, the leader who preaches family values while repeatedly betraying his family, the expert who sells confidence while being consumed by anxiety and self-doubt. All these individuals are navigating a minefield where every misstep can result in devastating and permanent exposure. But perhaps the most revealing aspect of the period we are entering is the way it will test our capacity for genuine adaptation versus our dependence on external structures of validation. Fake strength is, in essence, a form of outsourcing self-esteem. People who pretend to be strong have usually built their confidence on external pillars: social status, material wealth, public approval, positions of authority, or relationships that feed their ego. When these external structures begin to waver, as they inevitably will in the turbulent environment we are entering, the entire house of cards of the fake personality collapses all at once. On the other hand, individuals who have developed an honest understanding of their own limitations and who have built their resilience through self-knowledge and acceptance of human vulnerability possess internal resources that remain accessible regardless of external circumstances. The fundamental difference between real strength and fake strength lies in the relationship with uncertainty and failure. Fake strength requires constant control and consistent success to maintain itself. It is a performance that cannot admit errors, that cannot show doubts, that cannot acknowledge limitations without risking total collapse of the constructed persona. This creates a rigidity that becomes increasingly unsustainable as reality becomes more complex and unpredictable. Real strength, on the other hand, is built through direct experience of human fragility and the discovery that it is possible to survive and thrive even when we don't have all the answers, even when we make mistakes, even when we need to ask for help or admit ignorance. This flexibility and honesty become invaluable resources in a world where change is the only constant. We are witnessing the first signs of this great revelation in real time. Observe how business leaders who seemed invincible are being exposed as frauds or incompetents when their companies face real challenges. See how influencers who built empires based on projecting perfect happiness are being unmasked as deeply unhappy individuals who sell illusions they don't even believe themselves. Notice how politicians who always proclaimed to have all the solutions are being revealed as completely unprepared to deal with complex problems that require humility, collaboration, and nuanced thinking, instead of slogans and theatricality, What makes this particularly fascinating is that we are not talking about malicious or intentional exposure. Reality has simply become too complex for superficial performances to be sustained indefinitely. It is as if the universe itself is applying a stress test to humanity, and those who build their identities on false foundations are failing spectacularly. It is no coincidence that we are seeing a dramatic increase in levels of anxiety, depression, and nervous breakdown among people who previously seemed to have everything under control. The pressure of maintaining a false persona in an increasingly transparent and unpredictable world is becoming psychologically unsustainable. At the same time, we are observing a fascinating phenomenon among those who have always been open about their struggles and limitations. People who never pretended to be perfect, who always acknowledged their fragilities and consciously worked to develop genuine resilience, are demonstrating a remarkable capacity to navigate these turbulent waters. They are not immune to stress or difficulties, but they possess the internal tools and mental flexibility necessary to adapt and find new paths when old ones become obsolete. Their strength does not depend on favorable external circumstances, but on a deep understanding of their own human nature and a mature acceptance of uncertainty as a fundamental condition of existence. Technology is accelerating this process of revelation in ways we have barely begun to understand. Artificial intelligence is not just transforming the job market, it is exposing the often superficial nature of our expertise and authority. Entire professions that depended more on status and performance than on real knowledge and skill are being automated or revealed as unnecessary. This forces a fundamental recalibration of our values and identities. Who are you when your titles, your positions, and your external achievements become irrelevant? If your answer to this question generates panic or existential emptiness, you may be discovering that much of what you considered your strength was, in fact, an elaborate performance based on external structures that are crumbling. Social media, which initially seemed to democratize fame and recognition, are revealing themselves to be cruel laboratories of psychological testing. The constant pressure to curate a perfect image, to maintain impossible levels of positivity and success, to compete in an increasingly saturated attention economy, is leading many people to burnout, and the revelation that their real lives are radically different from the versions they project online. The contrast between reality and performance is becoming so extreme that maintaining the facade requires psychological resources that many simply do not possess. But perhaps the deepest aspect of this revelation is the way it is forcing a fundamental re-evaluation of what it means to be strong in the first place. The strength that our culture has traditionally celebrated, based on dominance, control, absolute independence, and emotional impermeability, is revealing itself to be not just unsustainable, but counterproductive in an interconnected and constantly changing world. True strength, we are discovering, may include the capacity to admit ignorance, ask for help, express vulnerability, genuinely collaborate, and adapt humbly when our assumptions prove incorrect. This does not mean we should glorify weakness or abandon aspirations of growth and accomplishment. It means recognizing that the most durable and adaptable strength comes from a foundation of honest self-knowledge, intellectual humility, developed emotional intelligence, and a mature understanding of our fundamental interdependence as human beings. These qualities, which have often been undervalued in a culture obsessed with images of solitary invincibility, are revealing themselves to be the most valuable resources for navigating the complexities of the modern world. The irony is that those who always admitted their limitations and consciously worked to develop genuine resilience were often seen as less impressive or powerful than those who projected absolute confidence. But as circumstances become more challenging, this dynamic is inverting. Humility that once seemed like weakness is revealing itself to be wisdom. Vulnerability that once seemed inadequate is revealing itself to be courage. Flexibility that once seemed like indecision is revealing itself to be adaptive intelligence. We are entering a period where these distinctions will become not just visible, but crucial for survival and prosperity. Organizations, communities, and societies that have learned to value authenticity over performance, substance over image, collaboration over dominance, and adaptability over rigidity will be those that thrive. Those that remain trapped in old models of authority and power based on projection and intimidation will discover that these models have not only become obsolete, but actively harmful in an environment that demands transparency, agility, and genuine cooperation. Let me pause here to ask you directly, when you look at your own life, how much of your confidence and sense of strength depends on things that are outside your control? Your job, your bank account, other people's approval, your social position? Have you ever felt forced to maintain an image that doesn't completely correspond to your internal reality? I know these are difficult questions, and many of us prefer not to examine too closely these sensitive areas of our lives. But your honesty about these questions may be exactly what determines whether you will thrive or struggle in the years to come. If this recognition resonates with you, share in the comments. I recognize that part of my strength depends on completing with your honest experience. Your vulnerability may be the example someone needs to begin their own journey toward authenticity. What we are witnessing is not just a temporary crisis that will pass, but a fundamental transformation in the nature of human society. The structures that allowed elaborate performances of power and control to prosper are being replaced by systems that reward transparency, adaptability, and genuine collaboration. This is not necessarily a change being imposed by some external authority, but a natural evolution in response to the growing complexity and interconnection of the modern world. Systems based on rigid hierarchies and controlled information simply cannot process and respond to the quantity and speed of change that characterizes our current environment. The information revolution has democratized not just access to knowledge, but also the capacity to verify and validate claims of expertise and authority. An expert who built his reputation on credentials and positions can be quickly exposed as incompetent if his predictions prove consistently incorrect or if his explanations do not withstand public scrutiny. On the other hand, Individuals without formal credentials, but with genuine understanding and capacity to communicate valuable insights, can quickly gain legitimate recognition and influence. Merit is becoming more important than status, substance, more important than performance. This shift is creating tremendous opportunities for those who are willing to embrace authenticity and develop real competencies, but is simultaneously destroying the power structures that many individuals used to sustain inflated personas. Executives who depended on intimidation and political positioning are discovering that these tactics have not only become ineffective, but counterproductive in environments where collaboration and transparency are necessary to solve complex problems. Leaders who build their careers on charisma and empty rhetoric are being exposed when confronted with challenges that require real technical knowledge and practical implementation capacity. The speed of this change is catching many by surprise. Structures that seemed solid and permanent are crumbling in a matter of months or even weeks. Companies that dominated their industries for decades are becoming irrelevant overnight. Public figures who seemed unquestionable are being unmasked and forgotten with a rapidity that would have been unthinkable in previous eras. The acceleration of change means there is no time for gradual adaptation or smooth transition. Either you possess the internal resources to navigate this turbulence, or you fall behind in a brutal and definitive way. But here lies an extraordinary opportunity that many people have not yet fully recognized. This period of revelation and restructuring is also a period of redistribution of power and influence. When old structures crumble, spaces are created for new forms of leadership and authority to emerge. Individuals who were previously marginalized because they did not fit traditional models of success and power are discovering that their unique perspectives and authenticity have become valuable resources. People who have always been honest about their struggles and limitations are being sought as mentors and leaders because their credibility and relatability have become more important than projections of perfection. The fundamental question that each of us needs to confront is not whether these changes will happen. They're already happening. But whether we will consciously participate in this transformation or be passively dragged along by it. This requires radical honesty with yourself about who you really are versus who you have been pretending to be. It requires the courage to abandon aspects of your identity that were built on false foundations, even if this means going through a period of uncertainty and vulnerability. It requires developing new competencies and perspectives that are relevant to the emerging world, not to the world that is disappearing. The process of distinguishing real strength from fake strength in your own life can be uncomfortable, but it is essential. Start by asking difficult questions. When do you feel most anxious or threatened? Is it when your expertise is questioned? When your authority is challenged? When your achievements are minimized? These may be signs that aspects of your identity are built on foundations that are not as solid as you believed. On the other hand, in which situations do you feel genuinely confident and capable, regardless of external recognition or circumstances? These may indicate areas where you have developed real competencies and self-knowledge. Real strength has certain distinctive characteristics that differentiate it from performance. It is sustainable over time and through varying circumstances. It does not require constant validation or external support structures to maintain itself. It includes the capacity to admit error and ignorance without collapse of self-esteem. It allows for genuine collaboration and continuous learning. It is flexible and adaptable instead of rigid and defensive. It is based on intrinsic competencies and values instead of comparisons and relative status. It includes the capacity to find meaning and purpose even in difficult or uncertain circumstances. Developing these qualities does not happen overnight, but the period we are entering offers accelerated opportunities for growth and transformation. The pressure and uncertainty that are exposing fake strength are also creating conditions that can catalyze the development of genuine strength for those who are willing to engage consciously in the process. This may include seeking honest feedback about your true capabilities and limitations, developing practical skills that are relevant to the real challenges you face, building relationships based on mutual authenticity instead of mutual impression, and cultivating internal resources such as mindfulness, emotional resilience, and clarity of values. The transformation we are witnessing is also redefining the criteria by which we measure success and value. Traditional metrics such as accumulated wealth, social status, or public recognition are becoming less relevant than indicators such as capacity for adaptation, quality of relationships, contribution to collective solutions, and personal satisfaction and meaning. This does not mean that material aspirations or professional recognition are inherently problematic, but that they become sustainable only when built upon a foundation of authenticity and real competence. We are seeing this manifest in multiple areas of society simultaneously. In the business world, companies that built their strategies on sophisticated marketing and public relations instead of genuinely valuable products and services are rapidly losing to competitors who focus on substance. In politics, candidates who depend on charisma and empty promises are being challenged by individuals who demonstrate real competence and a track record of effective implementation. In the field of education and personal development, authorities who sell quick formulas and superficial solutions are being replaced by mentors who offer guidance based on genuine experience and deep understanding. The irony is that many people who always felt inadequate or insecure because they could not maintain the performances that our traditional culture valued are discovering that their struggles and honesty about these struggles have become valuable resources. The person who always admitted their financial difficulties is better prepared to navigate economic instability than the one who always pretended prosperity. The individual who was always open about their mental health challenges possesses tools and perspectives that become invaluable when others finally confront their own psychological vulnerabilities. The person who never pretended to have all the answers is better equipped to learn and adapt than the one who built their identity around always being right. If these reflections have touched on something you have been feeling, but perhaps have not found words to express, know that you are not alone. We are all navigating this transformation together, and your willingness to be honest about your own struggles and growth is not weakness, but courage. By joining us in this ongoing dialogue, you connect with a growing community of people who are committed to authenticity instead of performance, to substance instead of image, to real growth instead of superficial gratification. This is not just an academic conversation about social trends, but a practical exploration of how to live with more integrity and less suffering in a rapidly changing world. If you wish to continue this journey of self-knowledge and genuine development, subscribe so that we can explore together not just what is happening around us, but how we can respond in ways that allow us to thrive instead of merely survive the transformations that are coming. The future belongs to those who have the courage to be real in a world that has valued performance. The great revelation of 2026 will not just be about who always pretended to be strong, but about the collective discovery that the deepest and most sustainable strength comes from honest acceptance of our shared humanity, with all its imperfections, uncertainties, and possibilities for continuous growth. The question is not whether you will pass the test that is coming, but whether you will have the wisdom to stop pretending to pass tests that never mattered and start preparing for the challenges that really define what it means to be a resilient, authentic, and contributory human being in the world we are creating together. I guess to some extent, but I was really interested in kind of the big questions. Also, even before with mythology, of where did everything come from? I mean, why is there something and not just nothing?
And then what were the stories that, because now, I say sapiens, do you say sapiens?
We can say both.
Yeah, we can. We can turn it into a musical number. The Hello Dolly's only just closed here. But I just wanted, that point where you thought, I really want to start dealing with these scientific ideas, and how much that felt like a change, and how much that felt like this was just another way of dealing with stories in the same way that you would deal with stories as a historian.
I mean, I think that humans are essentially storytelling animals. I mean, we think in stories. And part of the problem of science is that science often doesn't know what to do with stories and doesn't convey its messages in stories. So it is almost always at this disadvantage. And when you look at the world, so you see that in almost all cases, the people who only understand facts take orders from the people who understand stories. If you think about, I don't know, the nuclear programs of various countries today and in the past. So people who merely understand things like nuclear physics and quantum mechanics, they take their orders from people who understand things like Jewish mythology and Shiite theology and communist ideology. And this is almost always the case. And it creates a lot of problems. Again, you talk with the people who are leading, and we'll get to AI later, but you talk with the people who are leading many of the scientific and technological revolutions of this day, and just now we heard that the Nobel Prize in both physics and chemistry was given to research in AI. And they have this notion that because we develop the technology and because we understand the science, and maybe because they think they are smarter than everybody else, they will decide what to do with what they discover and what they develop, and this is almost never the case. Then comes along somebody who doesn't understand, again, anything about nuclear physics or anything about AI. They understand some mythology, and they give the orders.
Well, that seems, I mean, that disparity, I'm thinking now, tonight there may well be, well, there will be, possibly terrible destruction in Florida. And some of the people who are both using that as a political point are the same people who are also denying the science that comes with our understanding of climate change. And that seems to be one of the problems that we have, which is where people have so much information available to them, they can keep going, well, I'm going to take that bit to justify this story, and I'm going to take that bit, rather than go, I now want to read all these stories. They just go, which one is most useful to me now?
Yeah, I mean, there is a big misunderstanding about information in general and what people do with it. Too many people tend to think that information somehow means truth and knowledge and wisdom, or that information is the raw material from which you construct truth and knowledge. And it's not the case. The truth is a very small subset of all the information in the world. The truth is a very small subset because it's very costly. It takes a lot of time and effort and money to do research and fact check and analyze information in order to get at the truth. Whereas fiction and fantasy and lies, they are very, very cheap. You don't need to research anything, you just write whatever you want. And, the truth is often complicated, and it is sometimes painful, whereas fiction and fantasy can be as simple and as attractive and flattering as you would like them to be. So what we see again and again in history is that as the amount of information in the world grows because of different discoveries and inventions of humanity, it doesn't mean that the amount of truth and knowledge and wisdom in the world grows. And you see that modern societies are as susceptible as Stone Age tribes to fall victim to these cases of mass delusion, like 20th century
fascism or 20th century communism, they are as susceptible to that as the Stone Age tribes. So all the discoveries and all the scientific knowledge and all the technology doesn't really protect us from these dangers.
And do you feel that it seems to me that there's certainly quite a few moments in the book where one of the biggest problems is who controls the dissemination of information? So,
yeah.
I mean, in the last, certainly since Reagan in America and also Thatcher here, where suddenly there was an ability for people to very close, almost have a monopoly on controlling the stories that are going out. Yes, we can all get our stories out on, you know, some form of social media, but we don't have the huge power behind us of the news media.
The key question in information is not necessarily who produces it, but who disseminates it. Especially when it is very cheap to produce information, the bottleneck is human attention. And there you find not the authors, there you find the editors and the curators. They are they sit at the junctions of the information network. And maybe I'll give two examples from history. So one of the most important editorial processes in the history of humankind was editing the Bible. The Bible did not come down from the sky in its finished form. If you look, for instance, at the early history of Christianity, and when do we have the New Testament? So Jesus didn't write the New Testament, and St. Paul didn't write the New Testament, and they didn't read them, of course, because it didn't exist at the time. In the first centuries of Christianity, different Christian authors and different Christian sects and ways of thinking, they produced all kinds of texts. They wrote gospels, not just the 4 that became canonical, many gospels. And they wrote all kinds of prophecies and letters and fables and chronicles and so many different texts. And then there became a problem of what to read. The same way that people today, you open Netflix, so which series to watch, there are so many. You need a recommendation list. So also the early Christians, at a certain point, they needed a recommendation list. And this happened almost 4 centuries after the crucifixion. At the end of the 4th century, there is a committee of bishops and theologians that gathers in 2 cities, in Hippo and then in Carthage, today Tunisia in North Africa, which is a very important Christian center at the time. And this is the committee that comes up with the recommendation list that we know as the New Testament. They created these top 27 texts that every Christian should read. And they made a decision. They didn't write the texts. They were the curators and editors. And they made momentous decisions that shaped the world for the next more than 1,500 years. For example, there was one text which was very popular at the time called the Acts of Paul and Thecla, which told the story of St. Paul and his female disciple Thecla, who was a Christian leader, and she gave sermons and performed miracles and baptized and so forth. And this was a very popular text, and it was used as proof that women can be leaders in the church. And then there were other texts. For instance, a letter that was supposedly a letter from St. Paul to Timothy, one of his disciples, but most scholars today believe it was a 2nd century forgery in the name of St. Paul, which basically said that women should not be leaders, they should remain silent, their job is to bear children and raise children and do whatever the men tell them to do. And in the Council of Carthage, which is I think 397 or 396 CE, the committee decides that the Acts of Paul and Thecla will stay out of the top 27 recommendation list, but the letter to Timothy will be in, and this is 1 Timothy, which is still in millions and millions of Bibles all over the world. And this shaped how people think, even to this day. And, if you fast forward to the modern age, so again, the curators and editors of news, of information, they are some of the most powerful people in society. They decide what the questions of the day are, what people will be talking about, what people will be thinking about. And, in the French Revolution, one of the people who shapes the course of the French Revolution more than anybody else, until he's murdered, is Jean-Paul Marat, who is the editor of one of the most popular newspapers of the time, L'Ami du Peuple, the friend of the people. And then you have, for instance, Lenin, that before he was Soviet dictator, his most important job was editor of the newspaper Iskra. And Mussolini began as a journalist, then he became editor of the Avanti, the fascist newspaper, and then dictator of Italy. So this was a kind of ladder of promotion: journalist, editor, dictator. And if you think, who are the most important editors in the world today? They are not human beings. They are algorithms. With all the talk about the AI is coming to take our jobs, one of the first jobs that was automated was not taxi drivers or coal miners or textile workers, it was editors. The editors of Facebook and Twitter and TikTok and YouTube, they are not human beings. Lenin's old job is now in the hand of algorithms. They decide what will be the top of the newsfeed, what people will be talking about, what people will be thinking about.
See, that's very, because immediately it obviously made me think, Boris Johnson, journalist, Michael Gove, journalist, David Cameron was PR for Carlton Television. And it seems to, what those jobs and what you were saying about is they're jobs in which you are not looking for truth, they're jobs in which you're looking for sales of your story. So that's
That depends on how you do your job. I mean, that's the biggest question when we talk about algorithms or when we talk about humans, is what is the goal? If you aim for sales and user engagement, that often leads in very dangerous directions. The algorithms, what they discovered over the last 15 years or so, is that if you want to increase user engagement, and engagement, it sounds a good thing, like who doesn't want to be engaged? But the algorithms discovered that the easiest way to increase user engagement, which means to make people spend more time on the platform, is to press the anger button, or the fear button, or the greed button in the brain. This is how you glue people to the screens. And this resulted in this epidemic of toxic information, which is drowning democracies all over the world. Democracy in essence is a conversation. Dictatorship is dictate. One person dictates everything. Democracy is a conversation. And what we are seeing right now all over the world is that we have the most sophisticated information technology in history, and humans are no longer able to converse. Humans are no longer able to hold a rational conversation, not just to talk is easy, to listen to the other side. And in every country, they have these special explanations of why is it happening in the US. But then you go to Canada, you go to Brazil, you go to the Philippines, it's everywhere the same. And it is because the algorithms are managing at present the conversation, and their motivation is not to have a rational and meaningful conversation, but to increase user engagement. And people are very engaged. What we desperately need is more boring politics, but it's just becoming more and more exciting and engaging every day. And the tragedy of it is that this was known for centuries. This is not the first time this happens in history. If you look, for instance, at the print revolution in early modern Europe, and if you go today to Silicon Valley and you talk to the people who are leading the present revolution, they would often tell you the story of the print revolution as a kind of model. That look, when print was invented or brought to Europe, it broke the chokehold of the Catholic Church over the European information system, and this led to the scientific revolution. And this is what we are doing right now. And the tragedy is that they just don't know the history. The print revolution did not lead to the scientific revolution. There are 200 years between when Gutenberg brings print to Europe in the middle of the 15th century until you see the real flowering of the scientific revolution in the 17th century with people like Newton. In between, you have the worst wave of wars of religion in European history and the worst wave of witch hunting in European history. And the big bestsellers of a late 15th and 16th century Europe were not scientific texts like that of Copernicus. Very few people read Copernicus. It was witch hunting manuals and extremist religious tracts, because user engagement, it's very engaging. Like one of the really first big bestsellers was a book with immense influence until this very day called The Hammer of the Witches, Malleus Maleficarum, which was the kind of do-it-yourself manual to identifying and killing witches, something everybody needs at home. And it was a huge bestseller. And to understand why, so just to get a sense, a feel of what kind of book it was, so there is an entire section in the book about discussing the ability of witches to steal penises from men. And you have all these evidence that the author, Heinrich Kramer, brings. Like, for instance, he has a story about a man who wakes up one morning to discover that his penis is gone. And he suspects immediately the local witch. So he goes to the local witch in his village and kind of convinces her, forces her, bring me my penis back. And the witch says, okay. And she tells him, climb this tree, you'll find a bird's nest at the top of the tree. So the man climbs the tree and finds a bird's nest. And in the nest, he finds all the penises that the witch stole from different men in the nearby villages. And she tells him, okay, you can take your own. And the man, of course, chooses the biggest one. And then the witch tells him, no, you can't take this one. I know, this one belongs to the parish priest, not to you. Now, you understand why this book was a bestseller, who sold a few more copies than Copernicus's On the Revolutions of the Heaven, with all these mathematical equations about the movements of the planets. Now, this all sounds very funny until you look at the consequences. Because it was this book and other books like it that fueled the great European witch hunt, which was a modern phenomenon, not a medieval phenomenon, in which tens of thousands of people were tortured and killed in the most horrendous ways. Again, to give just one example, in Munich, a family, the Pappenheimer family, was arrested by the authorities because they were accused of being witches. And according to the methods recommended by the Hammer of the Witches of how to interrogate witches, you do it by torturing them until they confess. And the family's mother, father, and 3 kids, and the inquisitors start by torturing the youngest child, a 10-year-old child, Hans, and they torture him in really unspeakable ways until he breaks and confesses that his mother and the other family members are all witches, that they went to meet Satan, that they molest and eat children, that they get involved in these orgies, and that they murder people and summon hailstorms. And with this confession, they then break, and again, they torture and break the other family members, and they are all executed, including the 10-year-old boy. And this was the result of this wave of toxic information about witches and Satan and witch hunts, which did not have a single grain of truth in it. And when you look at Europe in the 16th century, you see it kind of washed by this flood of toxic information. And the key thing is that the printing press, it just prints. It doesn't judges what is true and what is false, what is reliable and what is unreliable. You cannot expect technology by itself to make progress there. If you just flood the world with more information, you don't get necessarily the truth and you don't get more knowledge.
I think that the Malleus Maleficarum is cause I have actually read it. The Folio Society bring it out about once every 10 years. And it's one of those interesting things which I often say to science authors, don't write a science book that's right, because it means that after 5 years it won't be printed anymore because you'll be wrong. You need to write absolute nonsense if you want to keep, so Eric von Daniken wrote about all of these, this is actually a runway for aliens, and these pyramids, they were built by some aliens as well. And his books are still published, and he's one of the most successful authors because he wrote something that was entirely wrong. Whereas those who are writing things that are accurate have to keep rewriting the book.
Yeah, I mean, basically in science, you only publish corrections. That's it. If you think, what do scientific journals actually publish? They only publish corrections to previous knowledge. I mean, if somebody comes and says, okay, Einstein was right, and Darwin was right, and all these people were right, so what? So this is not a reason to publish what we already know that. If you want to get published and if you want to get ahead, you need to find something that Einstein was wrong about or that Einstein didn't know, some lacuna in the theory. And this is really the foundation of science and of all trustworthy institutions. Now, we live in an era when people are losing trust in institutions, which is extremely dangerous because the only way for society to function without trustworthy institutions is with a dictatorship. Democracy is built on trust, dictatorships are built on terror. For democracy to function, there need to be some institutions that people trust. If they lose trust in all the institutions, the only choice left is between anarchy, societal collapse, or a dictatorship which doesn't need trust, because its fuel, it functions on terror. And then people ask, so okay, how do I know which institution to trust? And the best yardstick I know about is institutions that have strong self-correcting mechanisms, institutions that are not only willing, but are actively seeking their own mistakes and errors and are willing to identify them and to correct them. So if you compare, for instance, religious institutions with scientific institutions, this is the key difference. That in a religious institution, the claim usually would be that we possess the absolute truth. There can be no error in what we say. So there is no room for self-correction. If you think about the Bible, for instance, they keep printing the same text again and again and again for centuries. There is no mechanism in Judaism or in Christianity to correct errors in the Bible, whether factual errors or ethical errors. You think about something like the Ten Commandments. So the 10th commandment actually endorses slavery, because the 10th commandment says that you should not covet your neighbor's field or house or slaves, which implies that God is perfectly okay with people owning slaves. He's just very angry if you coveted the slaves of somebody else. No. You shouldn't do that. And there is no mechanism to amend it. If you compare it, say, to the US Constitution, which people often say the US Constitution endorsed slavery, and that's true, but the US Constitution also included a self-correcting mechanism. There was a clause in the Constitution that we know we are not perfect. The Ten Commandments start with, I am your Lord God. I wrote this, so you can't correct this. The US Constitution starts with, we the people. We wrote this, we are just people, we are just humans, maybe we made mistakes. So here is a mechanism that if future generations find a mistake in something we wrote, this is how you change it. It's not easy, but it can be done. And the US Constitution was eventually amended to outlaw slavery, to ban slavery. Now, in the 10 Commandments, there is no 11th commandment which says, well, if you want to change one of the previous commandments, you can do it by a 2/3 majority vote. So we still have the same text as it was written in the Middle East during the Iron Age with its endorsement of slavery. Now, science, it's built, the very central pillar of science is the self-correcting mechanism. You want to understand an institution, try to understand the incentive of the people in the institution. How do they get a promotion? So in a church or in the Jewish rabbinate, how do you get a promotion? If you say that whatever the elders said before you is correct, you have a good chance of getting a promotion after promotion until you become chief rabbi or pope. But in science, it doesn't work. If you just go and say Einstein was right, so what? You will not get a position in university. You will certainly not get Nobel Prize for that. I mean, the whole incentive structure is publish or perish. And in order to publish, the only thing that scientific journals publish is corrections and amendments. In the sense, I discovered something that Einstein didn't know, they meant, okay, we'll publish it. And if you want to go all the way to win Nobel Prize, you need to discover either a very big mistake in the previous theories or a very big lacuna, something some people didn't know. So this is an incentive structure that inspires trust. If you ask an institution, tell me about your biggest mistakes, and it tells you, we never make mistakes, don't trust it. If you ask an institution, tell me about your biggest mistakes, and it tells you, do you have a year or two? We can tell you a lot about not just factual mistakes, also about, again, moral mistakes, ethical mistakes. Like you go today to university, you will study in many seminars about how scientific disciplines were implicated, were responsible to some extent to horrible historical crimes. Slavery, imperialism, persecution of minorities, of women. Yes, anthropologists and historians and archaeologists and biologists, but they were part of it. They were partly to blame. And at least for me, this inspires trust.
So, I mean, that thing when you're looking at information that we need, because I was thinking when you mentioned the Bible, Francesca Stavrokopoulou, wonderful Bible scholar, she said the trouble with the Bible is it's a book written by men with daddy issues, which I thought was kind of a, yeah, and perhaps one should say it was a book edited by men with daddy issues, because, you know, for instance, you were talking about childhood interest in myths, and as we've seen in the last 20 years, you know, a lot of writers, people like Natalie Haynes, have returned to these myths and found out that they were entirely rewritten, and that the message, again, is very often a message of subjugation and of misogyny. But then it just seems to set with the power structure of, so anything that fits the power structure at the time is therefore we're going to keep that story and we're going to change that story. And then it seems to me quite surprising how long those stories remain intact. You know, what do we need now? Because we love always to think, don't we, that, oh no, but now we've moved on, now we're better at this. And yet every time we look back century by century, we see the same mistakes being made in terms of those who are oppressed and those who are marginalized.
And first of all, luckily, it's not the same mistakes. Humanity sometimes does learn some lessons. Otherwise, it would be hopeless. If you cannot point to any progress that was done in history by now, we might just as well give it up. If all the generations before us could not get anything right, could not improve anything, what are the chances that we can do it? So I think it's also important for historians, for others, to acknowledge improvements when they do occur, and they occur sometimes. But with regard to the survival and the power of myth, and especially of very ancient mythologies, the two things to realize, first of all, the only thing that can replace one story is another story. You can never replace a story just with a list of facts and statistics and so forth, because this is not the way that people think. You can use facts and statistics to puncture lots of holes in the existing mythology. It will still hold. What you need to do is just tell a different story, a better story, and then you don't need to puncture any holes in the old story. So that's the first principle. The second is that the longer the story survives, the stronger it becomes. And then it becomes more difficult to replace it. I mean, you look at the world's mythologies. So thousands of years ago, there were so many mythologies. Like every little tribe and every people and country had very different mythologies, and very few of them survived. And today, almost all the world knows just, 3, 4, 5 mythologies top. And they are extremely powerful. And every time we try to tell a new story, the old mythologies sneak back. Because they are now so powerful after being there. for thousands of years. And again, this is something that science struggles with. And I think part of what I try to do and other people try to do is try to tell better scientific stories, but they still need to be stories if they are to appeal to human beings, because we think in stories.
See, I find the mythologies, you might have been there in Singapore, there's this wonderful Museum of Asian Cultures. And on the first floor, each room has a different religion. And you see these wonderful mythologies with playful, impish, sexual, rude, angry, strange, all manner of demons and imps. And then you get to the Abrahamic one, which kind of becomes a dictatorship in which someone created us and is now just very disappointed, and we've been born with original sin. And it kind of feels like those mythologies have so much play and so much representation of who we are as well, all these different things going on in our minds. And then what we get with the Abrahamic faith is closer to me, in a lot of the ways it's interpreted, as a dictatorship.
Because they were created in an age of monarchies and empires. And, God is often depicted as a king. And a lot of the political realities of the Middle East in the Iron Age, they were incorporated into the mythology. So God is often made in the image of the kings, of the emperors of the day. And this is still with us. So we need to take these stories extremely seriously, because they still shape our culture, they still shape our psychology, they still shape our politics.
In terms of going, in the book, you look a lot at the problems of the algorithm, and especially when the algorithm becomes something without any human, once it just becomes a circle of computers. So looking at politics now, for instance, looking at the American election, do you imagine that someone like Trump could have been a president or indeed presidential candidate 30 years ago? Did it require the technology and the social media and this way of being bombarded with so many possible truths for us to return to this kind of politician?
It seems so, definitely. And again, what is really necessary to understand is the power of information technology and of social media in relation to democracy. Because democracy, as we said earlier, in essence, it's a conversation. It's a group of people coming together, talking to each other, listening to each other, in an attempt to reach some common decision about the important issues of the day. Now, for most of history, this type of system could only work on small scales. The only examples we know of ancient democracies are city-states like Athens or Republican Rome, or even smaller towns and tribes. We have no example before the modern age of a large-scale democracy, of an entire country with millions of people spread over thousands of kilometers that is managed democratically. And the reason was not that people didn't know about democracy. I mean, originally most human societies, certainly in the Stone Age, most hunter-gatherer bands and tribes were democratic. And also many of the first towns and city-states were democratic. The ideas were known. And if you look, for instance, at the Roman Empire, the Romans know everything about democracy. And even the emperors, they know that the Romans love the democratic ideal, so they never claim to be autocrats. They keep up the facade of democracy, like in Putin's Russia, or like in Maduro's Venezuela. In the Roman Empire, you still have every year elections for consuls and praetors. There is the Senate, there is the popular assemblies. They keep the facade, but it's not a democracy. It's not a republic. It's an autocracy. So what happens as the size of the polity becomes bigger? The conversation collapses. I mean, you can have most citizens, or a significant part of the citizenry of a city, gathering together in the main square to discuss the major issues of the day. But you cannot do it with millions of people spread over the whole of Italy or the whole of the Mediterranean. So as the size of the polity becomes bigger, democracy inevitably collapsed. And you know, if it was something about the Caesar family that destroyed the Roman Republic, we should have seen at least large-scale democracies elsewhere, in India, in Central America, in China, nowhere. Because the information technology of the day did not allow millions of people to have a conversation like that. The large-scale democracy becomes possible for the first time in history in the late modern age due to the invention of several critical information technologies. First, it is the newspaper. Then it's the telegraph and the radio and television and all that. Only then we begin to see large-scale democracies. So large-scale democracies, they are built on top of information technology. Information technology is not a side dish. We have democracy, oh, and you have information technology. No, it's the basis. And over the last 20 years, there has been a major, major revolution in information technology. So inevitably, there is an earthquake in the building built on top of it, democracy. And you see it all over the world, and it only makes sense. You now have billions of people spending hours every day on these platforms. This becomes the main way for people to form organizations, to recruit people, to motivate people for political action. So it has immense impact. Now, it's not necessarily a negative impact. History is never deterministic, and technology is not deterministic. The question is what we do with it. Unfortunately, what we did with it, with social media and with algorithms over the last 10, 15 years was the wrong thing. And we now have an even bigger wave coming of AI, which is going to change the world in so many dramatic ways. We are still in control, maybe for the next few years, but we have to make some really wise decisions in the next, say, 5 to 10 years before we lose control. Because what's different about AI compared to every previous technology in history is that this time we can really lose control to the technology. All the tales we had throughout history about losing control of technology, it was really just metaphors. You can't really have a printing press in charge of society. You can't really have a radio set or an atom bomb in charge of society because they can't make any decisions. AI is the first technology in history that can make decisions by itself, can invent new ideas by itself, can learn and change by itself, which means it's the first technology which is an agent and not a tool. A printing press is a tool. It's in my hands. I decide it will print the Bible, it will print Copernicus, I decide. AI, no. The AI can decide by itself which story to create and which story to promote. It can really take over. And, you know, there is a huge confusion around AI because now it's kind of the hottest thing, certainly in the market. If you want to make people buy something or invest their money in a company, you attach the label, oh, it's an AI. So everything now becomes AI, and it becomes difficult to know, so what really is AI? Not every machine is an AI. If you think, for instance, about machines we have for a long time, like coffee machine, most coffee machines are not AIs. If you approach your coffee machine and you press a button and the machine does exactly what it was pre-programmed to do, like you press this button, it produces an espresso cup, this is not an AI. This is just an automatic machine.
But if it says, I thought you'd prefer soup, then we realize something's changing here.
Exactly. If it tells you, before you press any button, it tells you, I've been watching you, I've been learning you, and I've been watching millions of other people, and based on everything I know about you, I predict you would like coffee, so I made it for you. Or I think, based on everything I know about you, that actually it's better for you now to eat soup than to drink coffee, then it's an AI. When it starts learning and changing, and because of this ability to learn and change, then by definition, we cannot predict how it will develop and it could escape our control, and in the worst case scenarios, enslave or annihilate us. There are, of course, much better scenarios. It can be really the best technology we ever invented. It can provide us with the best healthcare in history, with the best education in history, but it all depends on the decisions we are going to make in the next few years.
I'm definitely going to invent a machine that at some point, every now and again, the coffee machine just goes, "You've had enough." And that will just be enough for people to believe it may well have become sentient. But that's an interesting thing to me, which is, as you mentioned in the book, one of the most common images of AI going rogue is in 2001: A Space Odyssey, where we have Hal, and Hal actually has become conscious. But I get the feeling reading the book that really the AI may well, if it does in any way destroy us or start to, destabilize civilization, it won't even be conscious. It will still be, it won't have made a decision to destroy us. It will be something which has just run wild enough. Does that sound fair? Because I feel that AI and consciousness is still, possibly a long, it's the point that if AI beats us at chess, it starts to gloat. And then we realize, it's beginning to get conscious now. It's but it feels to me that long before that, we may well have allowed AI to run wild.
We just don't know. I mean, the issue of consciousness is extremely complicated because we don't understand consciousness in humans. We don't understand consciousness in other animals. Again, there is a huge confusion about the very meaning of the term. People confuse it with intelligence. So maybe just to clarify, intelligence is the ability to pursue goals and to solve problems on the way to attaining your goal. Your goal could be to win a chess. Your goal could be to drive a car to a particular point. Your goal could be to identify a disease. This is intelligence, and this is what we see now with the development of AI. It's the development of intelligence. Consciousness is something else. Consciousness is the ability to feel things like pain and pleasure and love and hate. Now, we tend to confuse intelligence and consciousness because in humans and also in other mammals, they go together. We solve problems, we set ourselves targets, goals, and we solve problems on the way there based on our feelings. It's our feelings that define the goals for us. We rely on our feelings to solve problems. So it's very hard for us to even differentiate the two. As far as we know, AI and computers in general until today, they don't have consciousness at all. They have intelligence. In many fields, in some fields, they are already more intelligent than us, but they don't rely on feelings to solve problems, to win a chess, for instance. But as AI becomes more and more sophisticated, it becomes harder to know for sure. How can we be sure that the AI is not conscious? We can't, with other people and with other animals also, we have no test for consciousness. It's really just a social convention. This is something that goes back thousands of years. Philosophers in ancient India and China and Greece, they already knew that there is no objective test for consciousness. So it's just social convention. We accept that other people are conscious. When it comes to animals, you can see it most clearly. When there is emotional attachment, we usually also grant consciousness to animals, like to pets, to dogs and cats and so forth. But we tend not to do it to animals we eat, because we don't have the same kind of emotional attachment. Now, what happens once you have emotional attachments and relationships with AIs? There will be, I think, a big pressure to start recognizing them as conscious entities, even if they are not. And really, we can't tell. And there are a lot of commercial interests, commercial reasons to produce AIs that mimic consciousness, that mimic feelings. It could be for good purposes, whether it's in healthcare or education. An AI that can show us empathy, and we feel that it's empathic, would be much more successful in giving us care or in educating us. There could also be dangerous reasons to do it, to manipulate people. we talked earlier about all these algorithms manipulating social media, and they really manipulated attention. The big battle in the 2010s and early 2020s was for control of human attention. But if you want to persuade people to buy something, to vote for a politician, to adopt a certain view, the ultimate weapon is not attention, it's intimacy. An intimate relationship can convince you far more effectively to change your mind about something than just grabbing your attention. You know, throughout history, emperors and dictators and governments, they developed tools to control human attention, to mass produce attention. Like you live in Nazi Germany, and everybody, if Hitler gives a speech on the radio, everybody must open the radio and listen to the speech. They control mass attention. But this is not intimacy. The radio has no intimate relationship with you. Now, for the first time in history, we are about to have the technology to mass produce intimacy. Millions, even billions of AIs that could fake intimacy, and in many ways can even be better at it than human beings. I mean, one of the things that humans are very frustrated with in their relationships in life is that other people often fail to understand how we feel or ignore how we feel. And we tend to go through life kind of yearning that somebody would understand us. Like we want our parents to understand us, our friends, our spouses, our teachers, our bosses, and very often they don't. And the reason they don't is because they are too preoccupied with their own feelings. Like your husband comes back from work, grumpy because of something that happened at work, and doesn't pay attention to how you feel. And this is frustrating. This will never happen with AI. It will never be grumpy from work. It is a machine that can focus its entire attention, 100% of its attention, only on you, only on deciphering how you feel. Again, based on, like it could follow you for years and know everything that you forgot about yourself, it still remembers. We learn to understand every tiny muscle movement in your facial expression. What are the emotional implications of this frown or of this smile? It could be far better than humans at deciphering our emotions and therefore at creating this intimacy. And then the big question is there really a consciousness behind it, or is it all fake? And this is going to be one of the big questions, I think, of the 21st century, socially, also politically and legally. Do we recognize AIs as persons? And you could have, wars or huge disagreements between countries when some countries recognize AIs as persons with rights and other countries don't. And the current debates and conflicts about human rights will be as nothing compared to such a world. There are countries, like the US is the lead example, where the path to recognizing AIs as persons is already wide open. I'm not sure how the situation is in the UK, but according to US law, corporations are persons. Now, until today, this was just legal fiction, that US law recognizes Google and General Electric and Nike and whatever as legal persons with rights. For instance, freedom of speech. This was Supreme Court decision from, I think, 2010 in Citizens United, all about whether corporations can donate money in lobbying to politicians. And the argument was they are legal persons, they have freedom of speech, donating money to politicians is freedom of speech. So, and the Supreme Court accepted it. So until today, this was just a metaphor, because all the decisions of Google or General Electric or any other company was made by human beings. The company could not actually make a decision. You needed a company executive, accountant, lawyer to make a decision. But AI can make decisions by itself. Now, what happens if you now incorporate an AI? You do this magic ceremony in a lawyer's office, and this is now a corporation, and according to US law, this is now a person. And this person can make decisions by itself. It can open a bank account, for instance. It can go online and hire its services in, I don't know, writing texts to people, earn money, and then invest its money in the stock exchange. And because if it's a really good AI, it will know how to invest money better than most humans. So at least theoretically, it could become the richest person in the US. So think about it. The richest person in the US is not a human being, and it has freedom of speech, which, for instance, says it can donate billions of dollars to politicians to lobby for more rights to AIs. And again, this is the technological path is still bumpy, but the legal path is wide open.
See, that's probably a good story, that one, because once you start scaring the billionaires, then they start to go off. What do you mean I'm not going to be the richest person? My love robot is, and then everything kind of changes there. We're going to have to take an interval. There's going to be a QR code. I've still not asked you about the pigeon. We'll begin that.
The pigeon, right.
So much. No, we're not going to have to do that in the second half. There's going to be a QR. Oh, there it is. And if you click on that, and then any questions that you would like to ask Yuval, I will read out, and we'll deal with your questions and the pigeon in the second half. Thank you very much, everyone, so far. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Welcome back to the second half. We have to start with the pigeon. So, so tell us the story of why it was decided in the end, this huge book about so many different and complex ideas should be represented in the bookshop by a pigeon.
Well, there are several levels to it. I mean, on the simplest level, there are some stories in the book about carrier pigeons as an information system, and especially about one pigeon, which 100 years ago was the most famous bird in the world, which was credited with saving an entire American battalion during the First World War. So this is kind of the first level. Then the second level is that we wanted something organic. On, you know, all these AIs and computers, and we wanted something organic on the cover, because the world is now in this tug of war between the organic and the inorganic. Humans, like pigeons, we are organic beings. And part of that is that we live by organic cycles, like day and night, summer and winter, times of activity and times of rest, of sleep. And computers and algorithms and AIs, they are not organic. They are far more different from us than pigeons are. They are always on. They never need to rest. And part of what is happening in the world is that as the AIs become more and more important as decision makers, as they take over more and more systems, the big question is, will they force us to try and function by a kind of inorganic timescale which will kill us? Because if you keep an organic entity on all the time, it eventually just collapses and dies. Or we can make the AIs slow down and adapt to organic time. So, and you know, I'll just give maybe one example if you think about the financial system. So traditionally, finance was a system created by human beings. Even bankers and investors are human beings. And they need time to sleep. They want to spend time with their family. They want to go on vacation. They want to go on holiday. So if you think about the most important financial market in the world, Wall Street, it's open only 9:30 in the morning to 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Mondays to Fridays, that's it. And it's also closed on Christmas and Martin Luther King Day and so forth. This is how a human organic system functions. Now, as AIs take over the financial system, there is increasing pressure on bankers and investors and so forth to be on all the time. If you go on vacation, if you sleep, you are left behind. And the same thing is happening to journalists, the same thing is happening to politicians, and this is really terrible. So the pigeon also kind of talks to this tension between the organic and the inorganic. And the third level, it goes back to mythology and to a linguistic misunderstanding. In Hebrew, the word for dove is also pigeon. In the ancient Middle East, there are just no doves at all. There are just pigeons. This is maybe why there is no peace in the Middle East, because there are no doves. And so in the biblical story of Noah and the flood, Noah doesn't send a dove, he sends a pigeon. And I know that pigeons have this terrible reputation, like in central London, oh, they are rats with wings. But at least Noah's bird that went to see whether the flood is over was a pigeon. And we are now in this information flood, and this is the kind of my pigeon that I'm sending to see if the flood may be over.
Well, that actually does bring us... That brings us, you were mentioning there the war in the Middle East, and the first question that we received from the audience is, what is your stance on the current conflict in Palestine? Well, it's a very tough question, obviously.
But a very important question, and as the conflict becomes worse and worse, and you know, it's like, I have a doctor friend who tells me that as long as the patient is still alive, things can get worse. And it's the same in the Middle East. You think you've hit rock bottom, there is still a long way to go, and unfortunately it can be covered very, very quickly. Things can become even worse, much worse. And I would say two things. I mean, first of all, again, going back to mythology, the conflict, the tragedy of the conflict, but also the ray of hope in the conflict, is that the conflict is not about anything objective. It's not the laws of physics or the laws of biology that force the people to fight. It's mythological stories in their minds. Because there is no shortage of land between the Mediterranean and Jordan River to build houses and schools and factories and hospitals for everyone. There is no shortage of food, so that nobody should be hungry. There is no shortage of water. Yes, it's a desert mostly, but we now know how to desalinize water from the Mediterranean. There is enough water. There is no shortage of energy. So what are people fighting over? They are fighting over mythical stories in their minds. They are saying God gave this whole place to us and we cannot compromise on God's present. If it was up to me, yes, I'll compromise, but I can't compromise on behalf of God. And again, the ray of hope there is that if just people change their minds, we don't need to kind of create more land. We don't need to create anything. We just need to change our minds. But it's very, very difficult to change people's minds. And the place that I would start, and this is the second thing that I think very important to say, that many wars, they begin in the mind with things that the mind just refuses to accept. There is like the mind says, I cannot contain this thing. There is no room in my mind to contain this thing, but it is out there in the world. So instead of changing my mind to find room for it, I will just destroy it in the world. And this is war. The attempt of many minds to destroy something that they just can't contain. And in this case, on both sides, you see that people just cannot contain, refuse to accept the very existence or the right to exist of the other side. It should be very, very simple to acknowledge that in this land, you have 7 million Palestinians who were almost all of them born there. They have nowhere else to go. They have a right to exist. They have a right to exist in security and prosperity. And in the same land, there also are 7 million Jews who are also mostly born there. They have nowhere to go, and they also have a right to exist in security and prosperity. And this is something that too many people, both back home and also around the world, just cannot contain. They don't find room in their minds for both of these things. They can only acknowledge half of reality. They see one people and say, yes, they have a right, but they can't see the other people and their right to exist. And as long as this continues, the war will continue. And again, the first step, and of course every side says, but they want to destroy us. And both sides are correct. Again, the tragedy is that it's not paranoia. Both sides are correct when they say they want to destroy us. But it's very difficult to change the minds of other people. It's a bit easier to start by changing our own mind. And the first step is simply to acknowledge the full reality that there is another people and they also have a right to exist.
Thinking of that in terms of the technology, discussing in the book, on so many situations, including this, it again becomes a binary thing. Are you with us? Are you against us? Which side are you on? As opposed to, say, being on the side of peace, on the side of... Do you see that there is a way of adapting technology so that we, again, in America, the way that we've seen the kind of the two sides, and in particular, when you see MAGA people, it's like this has become a religious belief almost. Can we start using this technology? How do we turn, how do we as an audience, how do we stop those algorithms that make everything a binary situation? How do we start trying to turn these algorithms into something which makes the sky wider rather than narrower?
I mean, so there are two questions here. I mean, what can we do, at least starting with ourselves in changing our minds, and then how do we control the technology that is messing with our minds? So again, it's always easier to blame the other side. They should change their minds. But it's always easier to start by changing our own minds, because even though it's very difficult, it's a bit easier than getting into somebody else's mind and changing it. It starts by kind of being more charitable and generous in how we interpret the opinions of other people and what other people say. Like somebody says something, there are 1,000 different ways to interpret it. Don't choose the worst interpretation you can think of. Choose the most charitable, or maybe the most charitable, but a more charitable interpretation. So again, to take one of the main discussions today all over the world about immigration. Don't immediately assume that if somebody opposes immigration, then he is a fascist or she is a fascist, or if somebody is in favor of less strict rules on immigration, then they are traitors who want to destroy the country. Immigration really is a difficult subject. I mean, I don't think that anybody thinks that there is just an unlimited right to immigration, that any amount of people can go anywhere they want in the world. This is just not workable. So, I mean, the democratic way is to have a conversation about it. Some people want stricter rules, some people want looser rules, and we can have the conversation, and we can try different policies. This is what democracy is all about. But if we turn it into this kind of Manichaean struggle between good and evil, that are vilifying the other side, then this takes, again, something that should be up for a democratic conversation and turning it into a life and death struggle which destroys democracy. Now we have the problem that the algorithms, even if we try to make the effort to be more charitable and generous, the algorithms are constantly kind of shifting and controlling the discussion and pushing it in ways that make it more engaging and exciting, but destructive. And here we need regulations and we need institutions. So two key regulations that should be enacted and should be agreed upon is, first of all, that no counterfeit humans. That algorithms and bots cannot pretend to be human beings. They are welcome to join the conversation in some cases. Like you want to get medical advice, it's okay to get an advice from an AI, provided it identifies itself as an AI. If you have, say, let's say on Twitter, some story gains a lot of attention, and you also want to know, oh, so many people are interested in that story, I also want to know what everybody's talking about, we need to know that it's really humans interested in that story, it's not bots that are pushing it. So we should not have bots impersonating people on social media. And anybody who says, what about freedom of speech? Well, bots don't have freedom of speech. Humans have it. So that's one key regulation. The other, which we mentioned already previously, is that companies should be responsible for the actions of their algorithms. Not for the actions of the users. If a human user published some hate-filled conspiracy theory, I'm in the camp of the people who think we should be very careful before we tell Facebook or Twitter to start censoring real human users. The problem is not that this person has compiled some conspiracy theory. The problem is then that the algorithm of the company deliberately promoted this content at the expense of other content, pushed it to the top of the newsfeed, recommended it to more people, and the company should be liable for that, for what its algorithms are doing. The last thing I would say is that regulations can only go so far, because as we mentioned earlier, AIs are not tools, they are agents. They can learn and change by themselves, which is why nobody has any idea how they will be like, what they will be doing, how the world would look like in 10 years. We cannot anticipate everything and regulate in advance. So what we need is to build living institutions staffed by some of the best human talent, but also with enough money to buy the latest technological toys to understand the front line of the technological development, and is able to understand and react to things on the fly. And before we even think about regulation, regulations are like our teeth. Before you have teeth, you need eyes to see what you're biting. So we cannot have a democratic discussion about regulating AI if we don't understand what is happening. And who can we rely on to tell us what is happening? The companies that we are supposed to regulate, the 2 or 3 countries in the world that are leading the AI revolution? I mean, how are people in Nigeria or in Brazil supposed to know what is really happening at the forefront of the development of AI? So the first thing we need is an international institution with a lot of funding from government that is able to understand what is really happening and to start a human discussion about what we do about it.
The next question, nice easy one for your next one. It's very, it reminds me of Harlan Ellison's wonderfully titled short story, I Have No Mouth But I Must Scream. Will artificial intelligence replace God?
Potentially, yes. I mean, if it can replace newspaper editors, so potentially yes, because especially if you think about textual religions which are based on texts. So the word of God comes from a text. This was the kind of the big invention of religions of the book, like Judaism and Christianity and Islam, that God speaks to us through a book, through a text. And for centuries, these religions just wrote texts about texts about texts. These were the mouthpieces of God. The rabbis, the imams, the theologians, this is what they do. They read texts and write texts. And now we have something that can read text and write texts like no human being. No human rabbi is able to read all the texts ever produced by in the Jewish tradition. So everybody reads the Bible and the Mishnah and the Talmud, but you cannot read all the texts of every rabbi that lived in Yemen or Poland like 300 years ago. Now you can. There is something that can. You have this AlphaGo that beat the world champion at Go, and you have AlphaFold that knows how to fold all the proteins in the world. You can have AlphaRabbi that just read all the texts, not a single one is left out, and can find patterns in the texts that escaped all the human rabbis over centuries. And then the big question for a religion like Judaism is, what do you do with it? Do you accept its new ideas, its revolutionary interpretations? It's a big question. I don't know what the answer is.
Can you write a screenplay?
I'll say one more thing about it. Because the whole idea around religions of the book is they want to get humans out of the loop. Because previously, you wanted to know what God said, you had to speak with a human. Like if you're in ancient Greece, you go to the Pythia, or you go to some priestess or priest. What does Artemis want? What does Zeus tell us? And then people said, but how can you trust a human? You can't. So they came up with the book. Don't trust the human, trust the book. The book is never wrong. And humans can't change the book. And so, in a way, the text is more authoritative than the human beings. And now, when you have this kind of super text, what do you do? Especially when the text can talk back to you. I mean, again, one big problem in Judaism and all these religions for centuries is that you have all these questions about the text, and the text is silent. What did you mean by this? You need to go to a human again to interpret the text. Now you have a text that can talk back. And if the rabbis say, no, this is not acceptable because of that, the AI can say, yes, But in the Talmud, in here and there, it says that blah, 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 and it is acceptable. So we'll see what happens. I don't know.
Yeah, make a movie called Alpha Rabbi. I want to see it. The next question, what do you think are the most pernicious examples of, excellent use of the word pernicious, by the way, pernicious examples of witchcraft-like thinking in the modern world?
You know, definitely you look at conspiracy theories like QAnon, it's exactly the same thing. It's really remarkable when you think about, you know, the Salem witch hunts in American history. This is one of the founding events of American history, is the Salem witch hunts, which are often credited with helping to prevent United States from becoming a theocracy because of the horror of what happened in the Salem witch hunts. And more than 300 years after the Salem witch hunts, we now have millions of Americans, including people in position of power, which basically believe the same thing. That there is a satanic conspiracy, a global conspiracy led by Satan, people who molest children and do all these terrible things in order to destroy humanity, in order to destroy society. So it's still there, and a lot of kind of tropes, a lot of kind of ideas about witches, you see them now being said about women, especially women. They were about Hillary Clinton before, now about Kamala Harris. It's, again, stories don't go away. Powerful stories that have been around for centuries, they don't go away. They're always there, lurking on the sides. Even if they were kind of pushed away, they can come back at any moment.
I found that fascinating, the witchcraft thing as well. I remember my friend Alan Moore talking about what a spell was, and he said it is literally spelling. It's the words that you place. So you go on social media and you create a rumor about someone or QAnon or whatever, and you are just you have taken a sentence of words and you have cursed someone.
And continuing a little bit about QAnon, the interesting thing about it, it was originally created, inspired, the movement got going with anonymous texts online by somebody who identified as Q, which is why it's called QAnon. And this was, I think, 2016, 17. At that time, there was no technology to create such texts except by a human intelligence. Bots and algorithms could disseminate the text, could recommend the text, but not create it. Now, with the new generation of generative AIs, like GPT-4, it is possible to create texts of such a level of sophistication by a non-human intelligence. So technically, the next sect to appear online based on these online messages could actually be created by a non-human intelligence. And, you know, which is remarkable because throughout history you had all these religions claiming that they were created by a non-human intelligence, but this was never true. Now it can actually literally be true that there could be a religion on earth with millions of followers whose holy text was written not by a human being.
So that also answers the previous question about God again as well, which is... now, another nice, easy one there for you. Do you believe in free will or determinism?
It's not the only choice. I'm non-binary on that question. And with regard to free will, I would say it's a very problematic idea, especially in the age of AI. Belief or naive belief in free will, why did I choose to do this, to vote for that person, to buy that product? Because this is my free will. It's dangerous because it makes us lose curiosity about how we actually make decisions, about the influences about our decisions, and the easiest people to manipulate are the people who believe in free will. That they believe that all their decisions simply, if you believe that my decision is the result of this kind of mystical free will, there is nothing to investigate. Investigation of myself, getting to know myself, relies on assuming that there is more than free will. There are cultural influences. There are political manipulations. There are biological influences. There are biochemical influences. But I decided to do this, to buy that, to vote for that person because of some genetic factor. because of some influence campaign. And for me, the key thing is be more curious about yourself, about your decision-making process, about what is really happening in your mind. If you embark on this journey, on this quest of getting to know myself better, getting to know my mind better, and after years of meditating and exploring and using scientific methods and going to therapy and whatever, and understanding that yes, there are cultural influences, and yes, there are biological influences, and yet I have identified something that cannot be explained by any of those, then okay, call it free will. But don't start with this assumption. It's especially in today's world, when it's becoming easier and easier to hack people and to manipulate people, it's a dangerous assumption that we are just making all our decisions out of free will. And we should remember that freedom is not something that you just have. Freedom is something you have to struggle for. Even the inner freedom of making our minds about different things.
Seems to me, you know, very important what you were. I think every day we should have a moment where we ask ourselves why we believe what we believe. You know, there'll be stories that come up and you have to think, hang on a minute, why do I believe that? Because quite often we find that, again, in arguments on social media, when someone says, but why are you saying that? And they'll say, well, do your own research. And no one would say that if they actually had the evidence. Just say, go and read this and trust it. But so that, I think that's a very important part.
Maybe I'll add to that, you know, I practice meditation, and this is basically the practice of getting to know your own mind. And where do all these thoughts and decisions and opinions come from? You know, just sit there with closed eyes and you just observe what is happening inside you, and suddenly a thought pops up, an opinion pops up. And where did this come from? I didn't decide in advance, oh, I want to think this thought, and then it appeared. No. And this is really fascinating. And this is the kind of journey of self-exploration. And one of the important things you realize as you do that, or at least I realized as I did it, is that the mind is just full of junk that we accumulated over the years. Like it's just full of junk. There is so much, again, hatred and fear and greed and malice that we've accumulated over the years. And we have to be very careful about it. Like we are now here sitting and sharing our minds with hundreds of people. And this is a big responsibility. And if you think about politicians who talk in front of audiences of millions, so, you know, the words, thoughts, that something popped up in your mind, and you say, oh, I'll share it with everybody. And you're basically planting seeds in millions of minds. And you have to be very, very careful about, maybe it's junk. Maybe it's just garbage. And you know, there are a lot of politicians these days that they really love walls and border guards. And I think that all people, but especially people who are leaders, they need a wall between the mind and the mouth, and a very strong border guard on that wall. And whenever these kind of junk thoughts try to sneak over the border, stop those immigrants, don't let them in.
What is your ideal parallel job if you weren't an author?
Oh, I don't know. I haven't thought about it, yeah.
Next time you meditate, and then come back here and tell everyone.
That's
the. Well, I think that's that bit where you were just talking about the junk as well. I think that's an important thing for us to understand. I remember talking to a neuroscientist who said sometimes you have a thought and you think, oh my God, I didn't know I had that kind of thought inside me, and it can really shock you. And he said sometimes you have to realise it's just the noise of the machinery. And I thought that's such a useful thing, that not every thought that we have
to share
has
with
to
everybody.
define us. You go, yeah, that was just the noise of the machinery.
Exactly. Yeah.
We've got 3 minutes left.
Ooh.
So, well, another easy one for you. We've been talking about this. How do we control AI? Now, we've kind of been talking about this quite a lot, but in terms of for people, again, this thing that what can we do? What is the relationship that we can have? Because obviously we are, whether we want to or not, artificial intelligence is playing a part in our lives. So what are the best ways that we can try and control the way it develops?
Again, before you kind of rush to adopt, oh, I support this regulation or that regulation, the key things are understanding and cooperating. We first of all need to understand what we are facing. And, very complex to understand AI because it has enormous positive potential and also enormous negative potential, and we need to understand both. And secondly, it's not something you can do as an individual by yourself. It's only by very large-scale cooperation. Again, that's why I keep returning to the theme of institutions, because the only way to build a benign society, whether in the age of AI or in any previous age, was relying on institutions. If you try to rely only on yourself, you can't. And if you try to rely just on some individual genius, that person will solve everything, or this person is the messiah, it never works. We need, again, it's the kind of boring stuff of building and maintaining these large, complex institutions, and most importantly, institutions that can identify and correct their own mistakes. The AI revolution will develop very, very rapidly. Nobody can anticipate it in advance. So whatever your thoughts are about how to deal with it, assume that you also make errors or that there are lacunas, you don't see these areas. And this is why you need to cooperate with other people and to have these strong mechanisms to identify and correct mistakes.
It seems like with a lot of the work and the interviews I read, that ultimately underneath it all, one of the things that we must always remember is be curious, be interested, and be ready to change if the evidence that we see before us tells us, well, what I have believed, yeah, that was what I believed when I had that information, but I found new information which seems valid. But the curiosity seems to be the thing that you thrive on.
It's not just being curious, it's really being able to change. And to change our minds more than anything else. That, AI is going to develop extremely rapidly, and our minds need the flexibility to keep up with it. And I think we can do it. I mean, I'm not I won't tell you that we have an insurance from somebody that it will succeed, but we have a chance, we have a good chance. If for every dollar and every pound and every minute that we invest in developing artificial intelligence, we invest another dollar and pound and minute in developing our own minds, we will be okay.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. You're all going to love the book that you're taking away with you. It will change many of your ideas and help them develop as well. Ladies and gentlemen, let's hear it for Yuval. Thank you. There we go, Karen.
Thank you.
Hello, everybody. And what I want to talk to you today about is the power to shape the world and the power to shape our future. About your power as leaders and as innovators, but also about the power of the human species as a whole. And the big question we are facing is whether AI is taking away humanity's power to control our future, or perhaps AI is giving humanity more power than ever before. And also, can we even speak about humanity, about a single humanity anymore? Or perhaps humanity in the era of AI is splitting into different groups, each with a radically different future. But before we get to AI, we have to say a few words about politics. The relatively stable liberal order of the early 21st century is collapsing. Instead of a cooperative order based on universal values, global institutions, and international laws, we are entering into a super competitive, chaotic world in which only one thing matters, and this one thing is brute force. Leaders like President Trump envision the world as a collection of fortresses, with each country separated from the others by high walls. Financial walls, like tariffs, military walls, cultural walls, and physical walls. This vision may have certain advantages, but it fails to address one key problem. Walled fortresses are seldom friendly. Thousands of years of history teach us that each national fortress would probably want a bit more security, prosperity, and territory for itself at the expense of the neighbors. And in the absence of universal values, global institutions, and international laws, how would rival fortresses resolve their disputes? For millennia, the vision of the world as a collection of fortresses always led to exactly the same outcome: a never-ending cycle of wars, with powerful empires conquering their weaker neighbors and eventually fighting each other for supremacy. This is already beginning to happen all around us. Wars of conquest, which were taboo since 1945, are coming back. Russia already sustained 1 million casualties in its attempt to conquer Ukraine and re-establish the Russian Empire. The Trump administration has already expressed imperial ambitions regarding Greenland, Panama, and even Canada, and seems to support Israel's conquest of Gaza. China, too, has its eyes on overseas expansion. The collapse of the old order is frightening, but it is also, of course, an opportunity to shape a better order. And the big question is, who will be the shapers? In the old liberal order, the ideal was that all humans would be shapers. It didn't matter whether you came from the USA or Brazil, whether you're white or black, a man or a woman, straight or gay. You had equal human dignity, and therefore, in theory at least, your views and interests counted for something. Sure, this liberal ideal was never fully realized. Ideals are not reality. But the liberal world was nevertheless a huge improvement over previous historical models. In the new post-liberal chaotic world, the ideal of equal human dignity is completely and openly abandoned. Instead of all humans trying to cooperate to shape a world that will be good for all humans, the current mantras are me first and might is right. A few powerful people in a handful of countries think that they have the right to shape the world for everyone. If you remember the meeting earlier this year between President Trump and President Zelensky at the White House, whenever Zelensky talked about things like justice or peace or territorial sovereignty of nations, President Trump interrupted him and said, "You don't have the cards. You don't have the cards." As we are meeting here in Sao Paulo to talk about the future of humanity, there are two questions for each of you to ponder. First, do you have any cards? Are there any cards in Sao Paulo? Or are all the cards in Washington, Beijing, and Moscow in the hands of people like Donald Trump, Elon Musk, Xi Jinping, and Vladimir Putin? The second question is perhaps even more important. Do you want to live in a world where the only thing that matters is cards? Is life ultimately just a card game with winners and losers? Now, I could have given the exact same speech that I gave now in 1939 or in 1914 or in countless other historical moments when humanity was on the brink of a major crisis. But this time, it's really different. Because as we ask ourselves, who will shape the new world of the 21st century, we need to take into account not only human shapers. For the first time in history, there are also non-human shapers on the planet, AIs. We might be quite close, maybe a few years, quite close to the moment when an algorithm would tell all humans, including Trump and Putin, you don't have the cards. As we enter the era of AI, I want to briefly explore here three questions. What is AI? What is the threat of AI? And how can all of you, business leaders, entrepreneurs, and innovators, help humanity not just survive, but also flourish in the era of AI? So let's start. What is AI? There is so much hype around this term, AI, that the term is now inaccurately applied to almost every machine, and it is becoming difficult to know what it really means. So let me be very, very clear. AI does not mean automation. AI means agency. AI is not a tool in our hands. AI is an independent agent capable of acting and learning and changing on its own. To be an AI, it is not enough for a machine to act independently, automatically. It must also have the capacity to learn and change by itself, to make decisions by itself, and to invent new ideas by itself. As a simple example, consider a coffee machine. If you press a button and the machine automatically makes you an espresso according to a pre-programmed procedure, this is not AI. The machine doesn't learn or create anything new by itself. But suppose that as you approach the machine, even before you press any button, the machine says to you, I've been monitoring you for the last few weeks. Based on everything I've learned about you, and based on your facial expression right now, I predict that you would like to have a double espresso with 1 spoon of sugar. So I've already made you such a cup. Here, take it. That's an AI. It learned something by itself and decided something by itself. And it is really AI if the following day the machine announces, I've now invented a new drink that I call Bespresso, and I think you would like it even better than espresso. So here, try it out. I made you a cup. The confusion about AI results in part from the term itself. The term AI has been invented decades ago as an acronym for artificial intelligence. But it is inaccurate to think about AI as an artificial intelligence if by artificial we mean something that is entirely designed and controlled by humans. AI is not artificial in this sense. So it's better perhaps to think about AI as an acronym for alien intelligence. Alien not in the sense that it's coming from outer space, it doesn't. Alien in the sense that this is a non-human intelligence, it's not even an organic intelligence. It operates on completely different inorganic lines. It therefore is able to make decisions and to invent ideas that would never occur to human beings or to any other organic animal. A famous example of this was given already back in 2016 when the AI AlphaGo defeated the human Go champion Lee Sedol in Seoul. This game became justly famous, not just because AlphaGo defeated the human champion. It was the way AlphaGo defeated Lee Sedol which shocked the world. Because AlphaGo, in order to win, invented new strategies for how to play the game that never occurred to any human player in thousands of years of the history of Go. Now, as long as AI invents new ways to play games or new kinds of coffee, it doesn't seem very important. But very soon, AI will invent new military strategies, new kinds of money, and even entire ideologies and religions. Consider money and finance more generally. If you recall the 2007-2008 financial crisis, you might remember that it was largely caused or started by something called CDOs, collateralized debt obligations. CDOs were financial devices invented by a handful of mathematicians and investment wizards. These financial devices were so complex that they were almost unintelligible to most humans, including politicians and regulators. And this led to an oversight failure and a global catastrophe. Now, what happens if we now allow or even encourage AIs to invent new financial devices that will be orders of magnitude more complex than CDOs and that will be utterly unintelligible to any human being? Such devices could greatly improve financial efficiency and contribute to economic growth, and they could become the bedrock of the global financial system. But what would happen to human politics when no voter or politician is able to understand and regulate finance anymore? And what happens if after a few years of unprecedented boom, the financial system suddenly busts and there isn't a single human being on earth that is able to make sense of what is happening? Now consider the implications for something like religion. Especially, let's take as an example, religions based on texts like Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. For thousands of years, Judaism granted ultimate authority not to human beings, but to texts like the Bible and the Talmud. Flesh and blood rabbis nevertheless had immense power within Jewish society for the simple reason that their holy texts could never speak for themselves. They were mute. Whenever you had a question about the text, you needed a human interpreter. Rabbis are humans who know their way around many Jewish texts, from the Bible to the latest commentaries on the Talmud. This is the source of their authority. Now, over the centuries, so many Jewish texts have been composed that not even the most learned rabbi is able to read all these texts in his or her lifetime, let alone remember everything written there. But of course, this is something that an AI can easily accomplish. AI could quickly read all the Jewish texts ever composed, remember every word in every single one of these texts, and also find patterns in the texts that have so far escaped human notice, human attention, and AI could therefore use its unprecedented scriptural understanding and knowledge to produce completely new interpretations of the Holy Word. And this, of course, is true of Christianity and Islam as well. In effect, AI can start functioning as a holy text that talks back to the faithful without any need of a human mediation. What happens to a religion of texts when the texts start talking? Now, since Judaism invests, as I said, authority in the texts, a flesh and blood rabbi cannot just ignore the scriptural arguments of an AI. And human rabbis will very soon find it very difficult to compete with AI's mastery of the Jewish canon. Even if AI is not granted formal rabbinical status, it is likely that at least some humans, including even some rabbis, would turn to an AI rabbi for scriptural guidance and inspiration. The result might be surprising new developments in very old religions or the emergence of entirely new religions. Now, these kinds of developments have enormous positive potential. They can help humanity in countless ways, from inventing new medicines to preventing catastrophic climate change. But, of course, AI also poses many threats. So let's move on to the second question of what is the threat of AI. The basic problem with AI is not that it is evil. The problem is that it is alien and therefore unpredictable and untrustworthy. At the heart of the AI race, there is a paradox of trust. Humans find it difficult to trust one another, especially as the world is becoming a collection of hostile fortresses. But the people who develop AI somehow manage to believe that we could trust the AIs. When I meet the people who lead the AI revolution, I normally ask them two questions. First, I ask them, why are you moving so fast when there are such huge risks? And the response almost everybody gives is the same. They say, we agree. We know that there are big dangers, and it would be best to proceed with more care. However, if we slow down while our competitors in the other company or in the other countries won't slow down, they will win the AI race, and the world will be dominated by the most ruthless people. We cannot trust our human competitors, so we must move as fast as possible. Then I ask the second question. Do you think you could trust the super intelligent AIs that you're developing? And the same people who just told me they can't trust the human competitors suddenly assure me that they could trust the super intelligent AIs. And this is such a paradox, because we have thousands of years of experience with human beings. We have a broad understanding of human psychology and biology, of the human craving for power, of the tricks humans use to gain power, and also of the forces that keep the human pursuit of power in check. We have also made considerable progress in finding ways to build trust between humans. 100,000 years ago, people lived in tiny bands of just a few dozen individuals and couldn't trust anybody outside their band. Today, there are nations like Brazil with hundreds of millions of citizens, and there are even bigger networks of cooperation linking all 8 billion humans on the planet. Complete strangers often grow the food we eat and invent and develop the medicines that keep us healthy. Of course, we are far from completely solving the problem of human trust, and there are still many tensions and conflicts and wars in the world, but with humans, at least we understand the challenge we are facing. In contrast, we have almost no experience with super intelligent AIs. We have just created the very first prototypes. We already know that even primitive AIs can lie, manipulate, and adopt goals and strategies that were not foreseen by their human developers. We have no idea what will happen when millions of super intelligent AIs interact with millions of humans, and it is even more difficult to predict what will happen when millions of super intelligent AIs interact with one another, creating AI societies, AI tribes. What kind of goals will they develop? What kind of tricks might they invent? True, at present, it is humans who develop the AIs, so we can try to design them in a way that will make them safe for humanity. But remember that a machine is an AI only if it is capable of learning and changing by itself, making decisions by itself, and inventing new ideas by itself. So no matter how human designs them originally, the AIs can then change in a radical and unpredictable manner. And it's a huge gamble to simply trust that these super intelligent alien intelligences will always remain our obedient servants. The humans who despair of trusting other humans, yet think they can trust these alien intelligences, may be making a very, very big mistake. Now, I know that it's sometimes hard for people to understand how AIs might escape human control. Due to the influence of science fiction, when we talk about AIs escaping our control, people tend to imagine a scenario of killer robots running in the streets, shooting people. While something like this is actually already happening in some places like Ukraine and like Gaza, this is nevertheless the wrong image. If you want to understand how AIs can escape our control, don't think about killer robots. Think about business corporations. What are corporations? Corporations like Microsoft or SpaceX or Petrobras are non-human agents. Though they don't have a body or a mind, these corporations can open bank accounts, can hire people, fire people, lobby politicians, and do many, many other things. Now, previously, this corporate agency was just a legal fiction, a fantasy of lawyers. Why? Because in practice, every decision made by Microsoft or Petrobras was actually made by some human being, not by the corporation. Every decision was made by some human executive, human shareholder, human engineer. But with AI, corporate decisions will increasingly be made by a non-human intelligence, a non-human agent. Imagine a corporation that has no human executives and no human shareholders, only AI executives and shareholders. this corporation can make billions and reshape the world. A practical question already today in 2025 is, do we want as a society to allow such things? This is a practical question. Do we as a society allow AIs to open bank accounts, to manage corporations, to trade and invest, to hire people, to lobby politicians? So let us move to the last question. How can humanity flourish in the era of AI? To survive and flourish, we need to remember two lessons from history. First, power isn't happiness. We humans have been extremely good in acquiring power, but so far we have not been very successful in translating power into happiness. That's why today we are thousands of times more powerful than in the Stone Age, but humans are not thousands of times more happy. That's also why the most powerful people in the world, like Trump and Musk and Xi and Putin, are definitely not the happiest people in the world. Secondly, to survive and flourish, we should remember also that intelligence isn't wisdom. Humans are the most intelligent animals on the planet, and at the same time, we are also the most deluded animals on the planet. No other animal can believe the kind of nonsense that humans can believe. For example, my home region of the Middle East is burning in a horrendous war, fueled in part by the most ridiculous fantasies you can imagine. Humans there, on all sides of the conflict, seriously believe that the creator of the universe commanded them to fight and kill other humans. And they also seriously believe that the creator of the universe will reward them for their violence with everlasting joy and bliss in heaven. No chimpanzee will ever believe such nonsense. But many highly intelligent humans believe it. So power isn't happiness, and intelligence isn't wisdom. AI will be more powerful and more intelligent than us. But the power of AI doesn't mean it will bring happiness, and the intelligence of AI doesn't mean that AI will be free from delusions. In fact, a super intelligence might very well be super deluded. Therefore, the big challenge for business leaders and innovators is not how to create more powerful and more intelligent technology. Rather, the challenge is how to develop the wisdom necessary to use all this power and intelligence for good purposes. How to do it? The answer is quite simple. Build more trust between humans before developing super intelligent AIs. Do you know why planet Earth is nevertheless ruled by humans and not by chimpanzees? Not because we are more intelligent than the chimpanzees. Humans rule the world because we know better than any other animal how to build trust with strangers and cooperate in very, very large numbers. We have developed this ability for thousands of years. Unfortunately, just when we need human trust more than ever before, many of our most powerful leaders are busy destroying this trust. Instead of strengthening connections between all humans, they are busy building walls between humans. If humanity is divided, AI will escape our control and will enslave or even annihilate us. On the other hand, if humanity cooperates, we can together develop AI and other technologies in a safe and responsible way. Think about AI as humanity's common child. When we educate children, we know that children learn from what we do, not from what we say. If you tell your child, don't lie, and then the child observes you lying, the child will also lie. Similarly, if you're a tech tycoon developing a super intelligent AI, and you're telling the AI, don't lie, and the AI then observes you lying, the AI will also lie. And if you tell the AI, be compassionate to people, but the AI observes you engaged in a ruthless pursuit of power, the AI will also grow up to pursue power ruthlessly without any compassion. This is why we must first solve the problem of human trust and only then develop super intelligent AI. If AI is developed in a cooperative way by compassionate and trustworthy humans, then the AI too is much more likely to grow up to be cooperative, compassionate, and trustworthy. And all of you have a role to play in that. You are leaders and innovators. Amidst the growing political chaos in the world, the business leaders and the tech innovators still have very considerable power to shape the world. So use your power to build trust between humans. Use your power to build a world which isn't just a card game between ruthless warlords. Build a world in which the dignity of everybody still counts. Thank you.